All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Carrie Hastings. I coordinate the Urban Water Funders. And today I am here with Andrew Fahlund, who coordinates the Clean Water Funders effort that is housed at the Water Foundation. Welcome, Andrew. Tell us a little bit about the Clean Water Funders and what is the primary goal of this campaign.
I think I will start with what catalyzed all of this. I think a lot of us who work in water have seen a slow but steady decline in some of the fundamental core protections that we have for water, both for people and nature, over the last 20, 30 years. And some of that was particularly surfaced or was punctuated by a Supreme Court decision that came out a few years ago that significantly eroded the jurisdiction of the Clean Water Act and the relationship between the federal government and protection of a lot of water bodies. When that came out, it became a bit of a catalyst for folks in the philanthropic community, folks in the advocacy community who care about water, um, and really wanted to try to reverse that trend, but recognize that it was going to take time, and it was going to take resources, and it was going to take a lot of coordination and cooperation. So the this effort kind of was born out of that, and initially was a collaboration among foundations trying to figure out, okay, well, so if that's the problem, what are we going to do to solve it? And I think we've centered around two fundamental ideas. One, we really need to build back up a more a base of infrastructure and support for elevating the voices of the people, for making water a more politically salient and viable issue. It's polled very high for years and years, but it hasn't been the kind of thing that has persuaded decision makers to take action, even though enjoys enormous bipartisan support. And so, in order to get that back, we really have to build a more solid foundation of engagement at the grassroots level, at the state level, at the level at which people experience water in their communities or in their watersheds. And so that also is a place where decision makers are held more accountable for the actions that they take and the decisions that they make. They have to solve the problems of the people. I think the other goal of this effort that was born out of this trend and crisis is in fact to actually incrementally start to build up and stack some wins in the policy arena around water. And again, starting closer to the ground level, closer to the local level, and we've really focused on states where you can actually get a lot done. And so the idea is to build up and stack wins for progressive policy outcomes that are bipartisan in nature, that can actually meet our goals for clean water that ultimately will add up to and cultivate champions and leadership at a national level.
That's great. I mean, I think you touched definitely on the scale then. So I'm curious if you can unpack a little bit more. What might some of these policy wins that you referenced look like?
Yeah, I think what's interesting about this challenge is that, as you kind of alluded to, there's different types of states have different priorities. And so, depending on the politics, the culture, the geophysical realities of a state, they're going to have different priorities. But I think starting with some easier, more straightforward, uh, less controversial issues, and then laddering up to more and more challenging issues is sort of a way to think about this is that you have to kind of develop a progression, and that helps with both momentum. It helps with one solution begets another kind of a thing. So an example of that might be um, an effort that is taking place in Wisconsin, where advocates have recently seen some changes in the makeup of the state legislature. It's become a lot more purple and more representative of the electorate of the state. And they know they have to have both Republicans and Democrats to win and to pass things. And so they just a few years ago managed to get some budget resolutions passed that support clean water infrastructure. And they were the first bills in the state in a long time to pass in by wide bipartisan margins. Since that time, they've started to engage certain segments of the state that are affected by a specific issue, which is groundwater pollution and the threats of groundwater pollution. I think over 30% of residents in the state of Wisconsin depend on groundwater for their drinking water. And and so the threats to that groundwater uh, are really acute, especially in some rural areas of the state. So the bill that some advocates are trying to push is this idea of a right to know if there's a threat to their drinking water. So it's a transparency law. That's the kind of thing that could then lead you to advances or changes in, for instance, urban water issues around, say, lead contamination or PFAS contamination or other kinds of threats to water supply or drinking water or source water. And so the idea is to focus on a progression of these kinds of efforts over time, born of what the local people care about the most and what's going to get them off the couch and get them, talking to their elected representatives and insisting on clean water for people and nature.
That I think leads perfectly into the next question then, which is about decision making. And kind of like who are the stakeholders and the partners, how are decisions made? But what I'm hoping you can unpack in this question has to do with the fact you are different than the other folks that we are interviewing in that you represent a funder collaborative. So, but I know that there is a coordinated effort of NGOs that are also deeply involved in this work. So help us understand kind of who is making the decisions about strategy as it comes to the, NGO efforts, the funder coordination to support those efforts, the interplay, and just some of kind of who's at the table and how is this all working together?
Yeah, I think this effort is manifesting at a bunch of different scales and across a really big landscape. You mentioned that I think even just identifying a few of those those players helps understand how this is going to play out in reality and in real life. So we have our funder collaborative and we have our theory of change and our ideas about how it is that we see these things moving forward. What are some of the criteria that we think are important and necessary and valuable for choosing where people want to put their resources and facilitating and fostering collaboration among different other sectors within the space. I think there are national organizations that are working together and collaborating. There's the grassroots ecosystem, the network of citizens groups that work on issues like urban water and affordability and water supply, watershed organizations. There are more than 3,000 of those across the country. And then there are other sectors in the economy, other sectors who care deeply about clean water but are maybe not part of the NGO community that are also play an important role and have an important voice in all of this. Some of them are small governments, some of them are private sector uh, business interests. All of them need to be able to have some sort of engagement and involvement in all of this. And so, I don't ever view this as a truly top-down kind of enterprise, but I also think that it can't be entirely bottom up or it's kind of going to be all over the place. And so we've got to kind of create um, uh, this solution in the middle that helps to helps everyone learn from each other and grow and develop ideas, strategies, concepts, helps share resources across uh, these big landscapes, helps define what the four corners of what it is that we're trying to accomplish with each policy win, and make sure that we're not sort of creating conflicting um, dynamics from one place to another. So I think trying to maintain sort of that overview and that coordination across the landscape, but also uh, acknowledge and recognize the sort of autonomy, sovereignty in many cases that these local efforts have to ultimately play, and make sure that that adds up to a national movement and a national effort.
Yeah. And so is there a coordinating body in place that is going to lead some of this work, or that's something you're hoping to
I,
support?
Yeah, I think that level of coordination is emerging,
Yeah.
and I think that it's going to continue to be emergent, if you will. It's showing up in a lot of different places, and so I think there's a coordination, especially promising coordination at the national level among some of the national environmental groups and conservation-minded groups. There's coordination happening at the funder level, as we've talked about. There's coordination taking place in each of the states. So establishment of these state tables or uh, state campaigns. Um, and so I think especially where you're especially seeing a lot of the rubber hitting the road. And I think that that's where most of this is really going to take shape and have a finer resolution, a lot more specificity. Um, and so, that's where you'll see collaboration within and among environmental and environmental justice groups and concert, hunting and fishing groups, that sort of thing, but also greater collaboration, coordination with business interests, with agricultural interests, municipal, water utilities, because that's how they have to live. That's where they're really engaged. And so I see the greatest level of coordination and collaboration happening within each of these states,
Mm.
but then you have to have the mechanism to coordinate across them. And that's what's especially emerging and evolving over the next few months.
So as we wrap, I'd love for you to share, when you think about this campaign and what it will take to be successful, what are kind of the biggest risks or threats to this work? And what are the most promising opportunities for impact?
I think I think one of the biggest threats is well, one is simply not having the resources to mount something of this scale and size. And so I think that you kind of start there. I think about the idea of making sure that the whole adds up, that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, like figuring out how to get all of these parts not to be a series of one-offs, but to actually start to come together, respecting that sort of local control or local um, orientation of kind of emergent ideas and goals and objectives that mean something to the people who are most closely affected by things, but making sure that that combines and adds up and leads to development of champions, development of messages, development of an agenda that actually um, rolls up into a national effort. That I think is the biggest challenge by far. But just getting things going in a number of really key high priority states uh, is what we have to focus on in the short run. And if we can get there, we can move to that next step.
Thank you. I didn't ask you, is there a timeline for this campaign?
We've roughly talked about 10 years,
Okay.
um, but uh, there are some who think it's going to take longer than that. And there are some who are less patient and want to see things, happen faster.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for your time and really appreciate the good work that you and all the funders and all the nonprofits are doing. Thanks so much.
Yeah, it's a big group effort.